Hello and welcome to episode 266 of Super Switch Headz, the premier Nintendo podcast in all of the internet. My name is Jordan Willis.
My name is Patrick Nisley.
And boy, oh boy, we have a special guest with today. Welcome to the podcast, Jared Stults.
Hello.
Jared's here to talk to us about age ratings. How do they work? Where did they come from? Right. I don't know. We're going to find out. He's going to let us know.
What does it mean?
Where do they
what
go?
Is it?
Cotton-eyed Joe. That's what I heard when you said that.
But before we get into all that, we're going to talk about the news. We're going to talk about additional discussion from the shareholding meeting now that it's been about a week, so we can get a little bit better translations. Updates to the NSO store, some F-Zero updates. Basketball is coming out, or by the time you're listening to this, will already be out. But before we get into all of that, how's everyone doing today?
Right before we started recording, and Jordan was saying that you have a lot of dogs, Jared. I'm not house sitting. I am dog sitting for a neighbor that has several dogs, 3 of them, and it's going fine. It's just there's a lot of dogs to dog sit, and
for sure.
And it's just summer, and summer is a little bit soupy and messy over here. So I continue to not be getting much work done on Monochrome Heights, the indie game I'm making, but August is not that far away, right? So, and I'm having a good time. I'm spending time with my family and doing other things, but it's weird because just my wife is taking a little time off work, and we don't have my son in any camps right now, so it's been a little bit like, what day is it? And that kind of vibe over here. And then I did have a bad luck streak. The other morning, we were trying to get out of the house quick, and our garage door was broken and didn't open, and then my car wouldn't start. And so had to do like a full garage door replacement type stuff, not like the door itself, but all the mechanisms and stuff, which was pretty pricey. And still trying to figure out the car. I think it's just a dead battery, like completely dead, but I can't get it out of the house. I'm working on it. We're one thing at a time. We got the garage door fixed, but that's what's going on with me.
Oh man, I'll come over. I'll bring my AAA card, and we'll hang out, and I'll get your battery replaced. Yeah, I guess I'm doing pretty good. It's been 2 weeks since I've been on the podcast, and a lot has happened. So I don't know how to summarize it very briefly. I was dog sitting for my mom for about a week, so I was hanging out in San Antonio. That was a good time. Got to see some family, some old friends too. So that was really nice. This past week has been such a blur that I did things, and I literally saw my friend the other day for a movie, and he was like, "What'd you do this week?" And I go, "I don't remember." We sat by the lake and watched some fireworks with my partner's dad's side of the family. So that was cool. He had a really unique access point to Lake Travis, so there was not a lot of people around, and we got to see some fireworks. They're pretty far away, but it was cool to see them in totality. It was nice. But yeah, honestly, other than that, I don't really remember what I've been doing. Playing video games, watching movies, just in that no job blur space. I'm dude, I think I might just need to get a part-time job or something just to keep my sanity a little bit, just to have some sort of structure. Yeah, so overall doing pretty good, even if I can't remember why I'm doing all right. Yeah, Jared, what about you? How you doing?
Also playing video games, watching movies, and taking care of dogs, I guess. I didn't think this would be, three for three. But so I guess back in September, my girlfriend and I rescued a pregnant dog. And tried to find, homes for, this is a long story, but basically she ended up having the puppies at our house, 13 puppies. So raised them for a while, adopted off as many as we could. We got stuck with 2. So now I have 3 dogs, mom and 2 puppies. And that kind of upended my whole life.
0 to 3. That's 0
to 3. Yeah. And puppies are a lot of work and a pain in the ass. But they're cute. So they take up a lot of my time and trying to train them and stuff. But yeah, you say it's so hot here, can't really take them out on walks, and I got a lot of they've learned to hop over our back fence. The
Great.
fence in my backyard is like over 6 foot tall, but they
Whoa.
like from a sitting position can climb over it. So bought all this wire mesh to try and like put up, and that's been a whole thing. But
Yikes.
yeah, I mean, other than that, just kind of the usual chilling, killing.
Editing.
Yeah, that's true. Jordan has talked about the movie a couple times on the podcast, and we worked on it together. That's actually how I know him. And so, yeah, in the process of editing it, trying to finalize a couple of other little details here, but that's a whole nother can of worms.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, whenever that's done, I'm sure Jordan will let us know. But
Oh, yeah.
well, moving along to some shout outs. Last week, we had an episode about Nintendo's DMCA / takedown happiness lately, and video game music in particular, and sheet music. And we got some new commenters over on our YouTube channel. We heard from Not Your Friend YT, said that they were obviously, I think both these comments were upset about, the situation, and, really enjoyed the discussion as much as it made their blood boil at times, and shared links to our guest Cello Cat and Katie Shesko's YouTube channels. We also heard from Russo Carne, also very critical of Nintendo, and so they could go on forever about how Nintendo uses their weight around laws and dislikes their fans and yada yada, and also, are they going to buy the next console? Probably. Katie Shesko actually joined our Discord, and there was a lot of discussion there about various things, but especially Xenoblade music with DCD I wanted to mention. Over on Twitter, our friend Shade said, "It's engaging, illuminating, and off-the-beaten-path conversations like the one found in this week's main topic that really separate Switch Headz from other Nintendo video game podcasts." Really appreciate that comment, Shade. That was really nice. So yeah, if you too want to be shouted out, send us a note, reply on the YouTube, leave a comment, send us a DM, and we'll try to shout you out next time. We always appreciate hearing from our viewers and listeners. We've also got a Patreon. If you want to support the show, then you can head on over to Patreon and become a patron. And it's also really helpful if you like and subscribe on YouTube. We're kind of close to a milestone over on YouTube, so that would be nice. If you're not subscribed, please do that. And with that, we can talk about the news for the week. So, like Jordan said, the Nintendo annual shareholder meeting happened, and we actually talked about it last week, but because of the way the translations come out, and also because apparently one of these questions was like censored from the official Q&A, we didn't talk about a couple things that we thought might be worth bringing up. First of which was a question about generative AI, or maybe AI in general, but it sounds like somebody asked, I think, specifically about generative AI and about using AI in games. And Furukawa, the president of Nintendo, responded basically saying, they're not going to do it. I think this is the short of it, at least not now, or not with, they're typical evasive answers, but I think that's great. It's always good to hear a big company say they're not going to use generative AI.
Yeah, I do like that he acknowledged that there is AI like technology that's already been used just for like enemy movements and things like that. But I feel like that gets really lost in the conversation about AI use within video games, because there are a lot of technology that is very similar to what we're imagine AI technology will be used for, that's already been in use for a long time. But he said, I think it's more specifically, we hope to continue to deliver value that is unique to us and cannot be achieved through technology alone. So to me, it's like a real evasive non-answer of like, if we use it in the future, we can say that we weren't doing it through technology alone. But at the same time, they're like saying that that's not the focus right now. So anyway, but I just thought that was interesting just to have that discussion about AI and how it's already used in similar manners to what we imagine it might be used for in the future as well.
Totally. That is a big part of the AI conversation. I feel like everybody is excited about AI until it was ripping off people, right? And yeah, AI is an important part of making video games. You have to use it. And that term is a little loosey-goosey, but anyway, we can move on. Talk about that another day. The other question that kind of was going around that we didn't have last week was that somebody apparently asked about inappropriate use of its characters, of Nintendo's characters. And I don't have the exact question in front of me, but that's sort of the specific language that was used of inappropriate use. And I think a lot of people at first were thinking this was talking about like fan games and that sort of thing, or like fan art and that sort of thing. The answer, I think, which is essentially, they're going to take every effort to make sure the consumers are not uncomfortable, with our IP. But I guess specifically there's some context that in Japan, there was some person who did something inappropriate while dressed as Mario. And I think that's kind of specifically what the question was about. In which case the answer
inappropriate.
Yes, something really bad. But I think that was sort of what the question was specifically about. And in light of our kind of conversation about Nintendo's overprotectiveness of its IP, like last week we had, it's an interesting question to have come up, but I think that they're more talking about terrible things. So
as long as they don't ban Bowsette, we're solid. We're good.
They can't. I don't know how you can't. They don't control it. That's the point, right? Yeah. But we can move along to a rather interesting, in my opinion, NSO update. So the Nintendo Switch Online app for the NES got, is it 7 games added to it?
Yeah. I know that they listened to the golf episode and said, you know what? It's a really good time to drop NES Golf on the NSO Switch application for the Nintendo family of systems. So that's all I know. No, I was reading through this and I watched the trailer and I'm like, I don't know any of these games, and I already have a pretty difficult time playing NES games in general. I don't know if I'll be playing any of these. Cool to see a big drop of NES games.
Yeah, and it's sort of a curiosity kind of drop, right? Like the kind of big ones they pushed were Cobra Triangle and Solar Jetman. I've never heard of these games, but watching the trailer is like, oh, it might be interesting to fire up for 1 minute, get frustrated and quit. But they're kind of unusual looking, decent looking games. I have heard of Mach Rider and Donkey Kong Jr. Math before, but I've never played either of those. But I'm at least familiar with them. But I think it's just great that they're adding more of this stuff for the people that do like these games or just want to explore old games. Like it's just, and not have to emulate them or do illegal things. And I know Mach Rider was a big subject when there was a lot of Smash speculation. There was some alleged rumor Mach Rider was going to be in Smash. That's the only reason I'm aware of it. In addition to the ones we already mentioned, there's the Mystery of Atlantis, which looked like a sort of platformery thing, and Urban Champion. If these are your games and you're out there, I'd love to hear why or more about these. But we can move along to the next up, which is that F-Zero 99, which is also part of the NSO experience, is getting an update. The big thing I've seen for F-Zero 99 on this is emotes. That's kind of what they're pushing. The 4 main pilots, you can emote as them now. Does that excite anybody?
I really did enjoy this game and I had a good time with it, but I don't know. I just dropped off. There's just like in a sea of games that are out right now, especially like live service games, it's really hard to pull me any one way other than the game I've been playing for far too long, Apex Legends. I say with my head low and in shame because I still play and I'm like, why do I still play this game? But I mean, it is a fun game. It's cool to see them keep updating it. I do like that. It's just, we'll see how long they continue to update it. I'm kind of surprised they're still updating it, but I 100% support it. Keep it going forever. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo that, which is that seeing this just made me happy that they're still thinking about it and supporting it. I kind of wish it was new tracks or something a little bit bigger than what it seems to be, which is kind of like, I don't know, the emotes and I forget what the other things were, like just not stuff
Star Rivals. Captain Falcon.
Yeah, and like new festival events, which I guess are festival themed versions of the courses, but it's just the same courses, right? Like sort of like cosmetic things. But again, like you said, it's cool that they're adding to it. I wish there was more adding to it, and it makes me kind of want to check it out again. But it's kind of the same way I dropped off hard, but I do hope it sticks around and grows. Continuing in the vein of updates, in the last Direct, Nintendo said that the basketball sport was going to be added to Nintendo Switch Sports, and just today, the day we're recording this, it was announced that it's going to be coming out. So it should be out by the time this podcast episode releases. Either of y'all Nintendo Switch Sports players? Do you fire this game up or even own it?
Yeah, I do have it. Yeah. And I mean, it was fine, but yeah, they, like the sort of drip feed that they've been doing of initial sports. It's like, this just should have all been there from the start. And then it would have been okay. And now when I started playing it, it was like okay with hardly anything to do.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's probably the biggest criticism here, right? Is that I don't remember exactly when Nintendo Switch Sports came out, but this feels a little too late.
Yeah.
Like
it's been out for almost 2 years.
It's too late for one sport. Like, and the golf also felt too late and was just one sport. So I'm with you that like, I wish that these had either been there or they had come together at a better clip, or there were more things happening more regularly. It's a strange, this game has had a really weird update cadence, I feel like.
Yeah, this game came out April 29th, 2022. So it's been over 2 years, and they're just like, you know what? Throw basketball in there.
Basketball, baby.
They're like, we were going to save that for Nintendo Switch Sports 2, but I just throw it in there. This will probably get me to fire up the game again. I did really enjoy, I never played the golf because I was too far away from it. But I did really enjoy the bowling, and then the capybara that's the little animal.
Yes, that is. But I know what you mean. The sword fighting one that's like Brazilian. Yeah.
The sword fighting was really fun online because you could quite never really predict your opponent, and because they're not standing right next to you, it kind of like added this air of excitement that I thought that was really fun. I played that one online a bit. And then I didn't really care for the bowling online because it became kind of like a battle royale. And I was like, I want to just play like a full game against people online and go from there. But I thought it was interesting what they were trying to do. And the bowling still slaps. It's still very good. So, but with the basketball and golf that I have not played, I probably will be firing this up again at some point.
Speculation. Do y'all think this is it? Do you think in like 3 to 6 months, some random other sport's going to be added to this game?
Who knows?
It feels really hard to guess, right?
Yeah.
Because of the way they've done this. Man, I wouldn't have thought. I kind of would have thought it's just weird. It's weird. It was weird that they put it in the Direct and that it wasn't just there too. And that it wasn't just here and now you can do this. They waited a month or whatever, or not quite a month, but oh well. I'll be curious to see how this basketball. Let us know, Jordan, if the basketball is any fun and worth firing it up.
Yeah.
And we can move on to Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. So it's not every game trial that we get to talk about the game trials, because for some reason Nintendo likes to have them line up poorly for our podcast schedule. But this one is going to work, so we can talk about it. I think Darkest Dungeon was a pretty recent game trial, so they're kind of firing off a lot of game trials right now. But anyway, Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope is going to be free to try out if you have Nintendo Switch Online until the 14th of July. So that is the end of this weekend. So I know this is a game that maybe didn't do as well as Ubisoft was hoping, because I think it just had a weird release date. I remember there's a bunch of things that came out around that time. And I know I was somebody who was kind of interested in it, but just skipped on it because it's like, well, there was a lot going on and it's Ubisoft and they'll probably sell it for cheaper later. But if you want to wait, just try it for free. Now's a good time.
I own this game.
Oh, you
already.
own it.
but I have not played it.
Well, you
It
better
was,
try it at some point then.
Well, it was like $15 physical, and I
Right.
was like, yeah, done, dude. Like, because I think I bought the original one for $20, and I played through it all. I bought the DLC with Donkey Kong, and I really liked the first game. I thought it was like a really good mix. It's kind of like the Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario of XCOM. So it's like got that combination, but I think it is even more like complicated because there were sometimes I lost. Like I don't think I ever lost in Paper Mario or Super Mario RPG ever. But this game is like difficult. So I am into it. I just haven't found the right time to play. I bought it last like Black Friday around that time whenever they were doing a bunch of sales. But yeah, that's why I didn't buy originally, because I was like, dude, a year after the first one came out, it was $20. I'm not paying more than $20 for this game, even if it is incredible. I'm sorry, Ubisoft, you kind of do this to yourself, but also probably how they make their money. So whatever. But I don't know if I'll try it for the trial, but I will play it eventually.
Fair enough. Yeah, I really enjoyed the first one too. And so I'm a little wary of this one because it sounds like it's more complicated too, in terms of the whole sparks and all that kind of like, just there's more customization, and I'm not really great at strategy games. And what I liked about the original is it was kind of a dumbed down or simplified strategy game, but it wasn't too easy, like you're saying. It was wasn't just I blasted through it, so it was like a good mix. And I'm a little nervous this one be. But I might try it out for this trial. We'll see if I have time.
I'd recommend it.
Oh, have you beaten it or played it?
Yeah, I 100%ed that game.
Whoa! Jared, you've been
love
quiet
Sparks
for
of
too
Hope.
long to share.
I was waiting. I was like, neither of you played it? This game. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So I loved the first one. And so I actually played Sparks of Hope on release because I was just a huge fan of the first one. And initially I didn't like it because it has this free movement instead of a grid system. Which like it was an immediate turnoff because as soon as I started playing, I'm like, this does not play. And like the sparks and stuff, it was too different. But then it clicked, and kind of like you were saying, it's a little more complicated and a little bit more like freedom, kind of what you can like the sort of like combos you can set up, like with what sparks you put on different characters in your team and stuff like that. And it being not a grid based system, but you still have limited range of movement. Like it just opens up a lot more possibilities. And it just clicked with me. I'm a big fan.
Well, that's a good endorsement then for everybody out there listening that has NSO to check this out. Glad to hear that. Well, we can move on then to the fact that the Wii U is like, I feel like we declare the Wii U dead every 6 months. And here's another of the nails in its coffin, as the saying goes. Apparently, repairs for Wii U in Japan are no longer supported by Nintendo as of this week. I think they were already not supported by Nintendo of America, but over in Japan, maybe you could still get your Wii U repaired until now, because quote unquote they are out. They have run out of parts for something that didn't sell well. I guess they didn't have a lot of spare parts laying around.
Yeah, but it's been done for a while. They stopped selling it a while ago, so it did not have spare parts. So like, yeah, that just happens to anything. I don't know. Like, this is just like not that big of a surprise to me. Yeah,
not a big surprise, but just another chapter closing here on the Wii U, as you can no longer officially get your Wii U fixed. I think if you've got one out in the wild, hold on to your parts. I don't know.
Yeah, buy broken systems and then save your parts.
Just a couple more news items here before we move along. We got some piracy news. Nintendo is apparently filed a couple of lawsuits recently in Washington federal court, that is the state of Washington, against a couple of different entities related to, well, surprise, surprise, DMCA. So first up is that they have filed a lawsuit against modded hardware, and that's one of the sellers, or maybe the seller of sort of these like chips. They sell mod chips. It's just interesting to see Nintendo being aggressive with their lawsuits and suing this company. I don't know a lot about, specifically what modded hardware does, but I do know from reading the articles that apparently Nintendo has like tried outside of court multiple times to contact modded hardware and get them to stop. And they said they would, but then they just kept selling them. So kind of get that, yeah, it makes sense. And then the other lawsuit is also pretty interesting because it is against a moderator of the subreddit called r/Switch Pirates. So it's not like against a company or like it's this individual who is online known as Arcbox. I guess this is sort of set an example, or maybe because Arcbox is, not just promoting piracy, but actually maybe maintaining or linking to libraries of pirated software. So careful what subreddit you mod.
I mean, it's in the name.
It's in the name.
It's in the job description.
A little bit on the nose there, but what are you gonna do? I mean, Reddit's like that, right?
r/sue me, Nintendo.
Please sue me, Daddy Nintendo, please.
There's analysis if you're interested out there about these lawsuits and that sort of thing. But if they develop and it's worth us kind of following, we'll try to follow. But I guess I just kind of find it interesting, in light of our last conversation again. And I think these are obviously more or less gray area than Nintendo fan content, but just shows how aggressive Nintendo is in protecting its IP. Last bit of news here is that Summer Games Done Quick wrapped up. SGDQ 2024 finished this past Sunday, I believe it was, and it raised over $2.5 million for Doctors Without Borders. And during the event, it was announced that GDQ as a whole has raised over $50 million for charity. Wow. So that's a pretty big benchmark for GDQ. Did either of you get a chance to check out any Summer Games Done Quick, or is this your thing at all, Jared? Do you like speedrunning?
Yeah, I like it in theory, but
Fair enough.
Yeah, not really my cup of tea to watch.
What about you, Jordan?
I was on my computer periodically, and I would just hop on Twitch and just pop in. There's no particular speedruns I watched that I was like, oh yeah, but I did watch a little bit of it, just here and there of whatever was on at the time. After like the Ratatouille speedrun a couple GDQs ago, I have a hard time watching any other speedrun because they made it so entertaining outside of playing the game itself. I love just the idea that this entity exists as like just speedrunning games in general. It speaks to the everlasting and enduring human spirit of trying to beat something in a very specific way. I don't know. It's interesting. It was interesting to hear last week Cello Cat and Katie talk about a little bit about GDQ as well. So
yeah,
but yeah, I didn't get to watch as much as I probably should have, but I watched a little bit. Probably, sorry, more than y'all. See, I'm like really like now I'm just like missing David because I feel like these last three topics David would have had a lot more to say about it.
Indeed. I did get to watch a little bit. It's kind of become a thing when it's on. My son likes to watch it with me. We watched the Chibi Robo race. And I've never played Chibi Robo, but was like, oh, this feels very Pikmin-like. And I really want to play Chibi Robo or them to make it available, Nintendo. They don't make their old games available, all of them. So, and then, yeah, one of the big draws, I guess, was another dog playing a video game. Awesome. At a speedrun event, which is always fun, which I guess is now a regular event. I guess that is going to do it then for our news. We are going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking with Jared all about the ESRB and age ratings. We are back, and this week we are talking about age ratings, about the ESRB, about those letters on the boxes of your games. I think we have a really, like that comment from Shade at the top, like we have a really engaged audience who's interested in off the beaten path niche kind of topics like this, and really glad to have you, Jared, on here for this. So Jared, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why we're doing this topic with you?
Yeah, for sure. So I work for Devolver Digital. independent publishing company for anyone who's not aware. And I started doing a bunch of different things, but eventually, to make a long story short, sort of fell into this specific facet of production of doing age ratings for all our games for every territory. So I do work with the ESRB, but I also do PEGI, which is Europe, USK, Germany, ACB, which is Australia, and there's a ton more acronyms out there.
CERO, is that what they call the Japanese
CERO,
one?
yeah, it's Japan. Yeah, there's a bunch that I do. There's a ton of other like little ones that sometimes I work with, but the bulk of it, ESRB, PEGI, USK, Australia, and then CERO and GRAC. GRAC is Korea. Those we kind of bundled together because they're so similar.
Okay.
Then there's other little ones like Taiwan has its own rating system, which I just find very strange, but sure. Yeah. But yeah, so kind of primarily working on that with all of our titles.
I already have a lot of questions,
Sure.
But maybe we should just back up a little bit and kind of just talk about the history of age ratings in video games. And we don't. This isn't like a history episode, so we don't have to get into it deep unless we kind of spin off that way. But I just thought it might be worth kind of mentioning about the history of the ESRB in particular, and just sort of maybe if you know more about the international ones too, but. Way back in the 90s, and y'all jump in and correct me or fill in gaps here, but there was the scare or whatever you want to call it about violence in video games with Mortal Kombat, and why can't I think of the name of that game? The live
Night Trap.
Thank you. Thank you. Night Trap, yes. And some other games, but those ones in particular I feel like were mentioned, and there were government hearings and all that sort of thing, right? It looked like either, there needs to be some sort of self-regulation in terms of age ratings similar to the movies, or the government was going to do something like that, right? And so, what is now the ESA, I think it was called something different at the time, created the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board here in the United States, which is now what is responsible for rating games, especially console games, right? I don't think every mobile game or every game on Steam, or I don't know if arcade games. I'd be curious if you know any about those sort of areas when we get into it. But is there anything I'm missing in terms of the United States and that sort of? I mean, I know that things have changed with the ESRB over time. Like if they changed their rating system a little bit, it used to be like kid to adult, now it's E and stuff like that. But that's sort of the big picture, right?
I mean, yeah, there's been some kind of restructuring as they go on, like certain ratings they've abandoned and certain things they've changed. But yeah, that's pretty much how it came to be.
And correct me if I'm wrong too, Jared, but like around that same time, I think some of the international ones formed. Like I think it was sort of even though that was a very United States government centric thing, I think other regions like the PEGI and that kind of stuff took off around the same time. I don't know the history of that as well.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the more specifics about them, but it was around the same time, and those ones ended up being a little more firmly controlled by the government, more government regulated, whereas the ESRB, like you say, there's court hearings and all that stuff, and there was the big like parent scare, what are my children playing? But ultimately the ESRB kind of operates almost as its own sort of thing, similar to the MPAA, which rates movies here in America, but compare that to something like USK, which is Germany's rating system that is like approved by the government, has to go through all of that sort of stuff. So somewhere along the way, they kind of were figuring it all out and how they wanted it structured and basically how much control they wanted over it.
Cool. Maybe that gives us enough background to just kind of pepper you with some questions. Like you mentioned earlier, the different, just the fact that there are all these different regions and different rating boards. Mm-hmm. I am aware of something called the IARC. That's the International Age Rating Coalition. Is that like the UN of age rating groups? Like, do they have any power, or is it more just sort of like a centralized system for developers and publishers? Like,
so that's funny. IARC is a purely digital thing. So if you want to get a physical copy of your game, you cannot use IARC.
Okay.
And each rating kind of has their different categories, their different sort of submissions, different things you do. But what IARC is essentially a generalized questionnaire that kind of operates on the honor system, where you as like a developer or a publisher, you fill out a very brief kind of points of like, well, what kind of stuff is in your game, and then it will auto generate for each territory what it should be.
So is it more like a guideline then? Like,
yeah, so you can use that. A lot of times we will do that for like, so say if you're trying to get something on CERT on the Switch, you need age ratings in there, but long form age ratings, which is when you actually submit to the board, they can take a long time. So we'll do IARC. That'll get you in the general kind of ballpark, and you can submit it that way. You can also then, put the rating in front of your trailer. And yeah, for certain digital only releases, like things on Steam, I don't even think you need ratings at all.
You don't.
Some other platforms will they'll be like, yeah, you can just IARC is fine. And you'll just run with that. But it is very generalized.
And you used an industry term that I was hoping maybe you could just explain in case people don't know. You said CERT. So you're talking about like a console, like when you're submitting a game.
Yeah. That's great point. So that's like if you're making a game and you want to put it on PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, whatever. Going through CERT is essentially a process where I'm trying to not how to complicate it, but it's like it runs through the system and they check and see like, does this work on this system, and what kind of things are they looking for? And you do that multiple times. That's not just like a game's done, put it on, it runs. You do that multiple times. You do that for different patches, how stable things are the achievements working? If it's got achievements, like all that kind of stuff. And yeah, at certain points you do like, I know Nintendo specifically will require an age ratings, so you can do IARC. And IARC will have like a long code attached to it. So you do one IARC, you attach it to your game, it exists for everything.
I kind of wanted to ask, so I mean, we're kind of getting a little bit into it, but just generally, how does that process work? Like kind of like maybe a start to a finish of what that process looks like on your end, getting a game rated.
Yeah, sure. So it's all generally the same, but like enough specific differences that I do have to have a different kind of approach to each one. But usually what it starts with is the lock kit, which a lock kit is, for all intents and purposes, the script of the game. It's all, but not just dialogue. It's all dialogue. It's menu text, in-game item descriptions, all of that stuff. It's what they use when you want to get your game translated. You have the lock kit, you pass it off to different localization teams, blah, blah, blah. But I have that, so I go through all of that to try and find any kind of reference to anything.
Adult,
yeah. I was like subject matter wise, yeah. And I usually use that as a starting point. And then I get some gameplay footage, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, just sort of throughout the game, one to sort of get a general feel, and then more specifics if a game has something that is more hardcore or a little more, mature, but it only happens once. You got to make sure you get that. And then from there, you take those two things, and then each ratings board has their own submission website, which are divided into different categories. A lot of them are the same, like violence, language, sex, stuff like that, drugs, but there are some differences. And then from there, you fill out those questions, which get, unlike IARC, which is generic, these are very hyper specific in terms of what kind of stuff is in there. Fill all of that out, send over the gameplay video, send over the lock kit, and in some cases, send the game. They will play the game themselves, and then pay them a bunch of money and wait a week for them to tell you what they think it's rated.
Yeah,
that's kind of all she wrote.
That's it. I think that's really interesting. I think that's one of the questions that I had sort of on a more granular level, which is like, do the people at these boards play the game, or do you submit footage, or both? Right. Because I think about like something like, I don't know, Cyberpunk or some really big, massive open AAA game, or like Elden Ring, a hard game. Like how are we expecting these board people to or is it all footage in in those cases and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sometimes I want more footage. In the cases of where they do play the games, it's funny. It's not required, but it is encouraged to give them a debug build, or a build that has cheats enabled, for that very particular reason. Like if a game is very hard, or even, not even like Elden Ring challenging way. We had a puzzle game, Talos Principle 2, come out not that long ago. And, puzzle games are all about you solve the puzzle, but if you don't know it. So just to do that, it's like, hey, here's the game. And here's literally a walkthrough of every single puzzle. Just because you're going to spend however many hours here. But that does kind of depend. It depends on the game. And also what's the grand scope of it? Is this 100-hour RPG? Or is it like a, 5 to 10 hour war romp? And it depends. The ESRB, as far as I am aware, is the only one that does not play the game whatsoever.
Oh,
you
never submit a build or whatever?
They do not require a build, and they won't do anything with it if you send them one. They are strictly based on the gameplay video and like how you fill out the submission itself.
Interesting.
Which can lead to violations, which is not something you want.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. What's a violation? What does that look like? Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically like if you lie, or if you, more often than not a deliberate lie, but if they find something of objectionable content that they felt you either didn't disclose or didn't disclose properly. And at this point, I'm talking specifically about the ESRB, because they're the ones who do this all the time. They'll either be like, hey, this needs to be updated. They'll put your certificate on hold, and they want more information. And that could be, like you mentioned, you're like, do they want more footage? They could say like, hey, we need to see this. Or, hey, we were going through the script. We saw this mention of people drinking. Like, what is that? Like, because they want to make sure they cover all their bases. If it all goes through, you get your rating, and then at some point later, somebody who works for the ESRB happens to play the game, finds content in there that wasn't disclosed, then you can get hit with a violation. And a violation is not good. You don't ever want to get one of those in your email. But essentially, it's like if what they will do, it depends on how severe it is. So if it doesn't require a ratings change, but like content descriptor change, so like the words next to there, they will say, update this on all websites, all, digital media, any physical copies going forward must have this. And then usually you just get like a mark on your account. They're like, don't do that again. If it happens again, then you're facing fines and potential restrictions. The worst, which luckily has never happened to me and happens very rarely, but if it jumps up a rating. And the time I can think about that is like the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas like controversy way back when, where there was stuff that wasn't even in the game, but it was data mined and put out there. But they're like, hey, this was technically like this should have been. Yeah. And that was like a huge thing, because then it literally increased the rating. So you had this recall of product, and, that was a different time. So it was mostly physical. So that's a possibility.
Dev rooms or hidden things in code or something like that. You got to be careful with that, right? Because that could be what happened there.
They'll come back and they're like, hey, we know that there's this in the game, or we have reference to this, and you need to adjust it. And I'm thinking, what the hell is that? I was like, oh, it's some Easter egg that like I didn't ever find in the game. But they're like, oh yeah, this one Easter egg plays this one thing that's got some violence in it, and so we got to change that. It's like, man. So yeah, it's crazy.
Jordan, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to do a little quick explanation of the San Andreas controversy, just in case anyone doesn't know. Okay. There was, they call it the hot coffee situation, where there was a mini game that was supposed to be in the game, but originally got cut, but they left the code within the game. So basically there was like a dating game that would end in some sort of sexual like cutscene, like a coffee date. I think that's what it was. Anyway, beside the point. But it wasn't actually in the game proper. Like when you put the game in your PS2, fired it up and played through San Andreas, you could not access this. It was only accessible through data mining, and it was found later through data mining. But because it was technically on the disc in the files of the game, that's when the ESRB stepped in. And yeah, anyway, I just wanted to give a little context for that situation in specific, and just in case someone in our listenership didn't know, even though it was one of the most famous cases of that.
Yeah.
The only one I can really think of off the top of my head where that happened on such a large scale.
One thing to note about that, though, so it's like even though it was in the files and it technically wasn't in the game, it wasn't a cutscene, right? Like it was an interactive sex minigame,
Oh,
and that is what caused them to basically go so hard as they did, because it was like technically gameplay, and like that in and of itself, like sexual like of each of the potential descriptors, there's like a whole subsection of things broken down and stuff like that, like sexuality, nudity, suggestive content. If you can like do something like that, either as gameplay or in like first person or anything like that, that is a huge jump up. The David Cage game Indigo Prophecy, I think it was called. That originally got an AO because there was an interactive sex mini game, and they cut it from the US release to get it down to an M. Like that's why they went so like pedal to the metal for that.
did that get included in the director's cut?
Oh yeah, if you play it on Steam, you got that.
Oh wow, that's really funny. I only ever played it on Xbox, but that makes sense. So I guess the next question I was going to ask is like, so how long does that process usually take, or does it take multiple tries, or do you have to communicate with the developer, like if they're going for a specific age rating or?
Yeah, well, if they are going for a specific age rating, then yeah, we usually have that conversation pretty early, because then that's when it's easier to take things out, or something as simple as like, hey, censor some cuss words or that. Usually it's a one and done. You submit and then you're done with it. Like I was saying earlier about like violations or things like that. That's when it gets more complicated, and that's not an ideal scenario. So you want it to be one and done. Gathering everything together, I'd say it's usually like a 3 to 5 day process to get it submitted to everywhere. And then from there, each board has their own like timeline. Some are 2 weeks, some are 3 weeks. You can obviously pay more money if you want it faster. But then they'll get you that turnaround based after that. So once you hit submit, as long as there's no problems, then you just play the waiting game. So
a few weeks on average.
Yeah, I would say between 3 and 4 weeks is like the average for most of them.
Is there one that's real sticky, like takes a long time?
Yeah.
If you don't want to name names, that's fine. Just one though, right? There's always one.
There's one that I like. By default, they don't take too long, but they have some problem. I don't want to.
Yeah. Fair enough. We don't have to.
Yeah.
Well, we talking about violations a little bit? I think that's interesting. Do the other regions? I assume the other regions must have similar policies, because we kind of were focused on the ESRB there and their violations, or is it more strict? And because you said like the German one was a lot more government controlled and that sort of thing. Are they just better at nailing that kind of stuff and not?
Well, so yeah, that's a good point. So they do have violations, but they are far less common because they are more government regulated. Also because they play the game themselves. So if they give it a rating that they don't think and they didn't find something, you can almost say like, hey, well no, we gave you all the materials. Where you would maybe run into a problem with that, which I don't really ever see this happening, but say you put some DLC out for a game. If the DLC content if the DLC has more like objectionable adult, I'll go with that, more adult content than what the base game was, then you have to reapply for a rating, or you could potentially risk a violation, because a DLC, even though you would pay for it separately, it operates with the base game. So it is sort of like it's attached, like in terms of like how a product would go, they view it as one thing.
That's really interesting. That actually really makes me want to talk about that. Like, so DLC is technically never rated separately.
It only is if you can buy it standalone.
Okay, so occasionally there are like, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is that like Xenoblade 2 DLC, which you could buy separately and play without the base game.
Yeah, if you can play the DLC without the base game, then it is treated as its own product and it needs its own rating.
Does a DLC coming out, and maybe this never happens, but like that is more quote unquote adult or has more things ever shift a game's rating?
It can. I've never seen that happen because usually that's way more headache than it's worth. So we will usually try and catch that before, because you say we're making this DLC. More often than not, it's going to be content wise the same as the base game. A personal example though, so Cult of the Lamb that Devolver did, all of this DLC they're adding, and they added all of these things, and I kind of had to have some conversations with them of like, they wanted to add a bar and like mix cocktails and stuff like that. And I had to say, hey, look, there's no alcohol in the game, but this won't increase your rating, but this is a new thing. So we either have to reapply for ratings, blah, blah, all of that. So you can have some workarounds. So the workaround ended up being that it's more of just like a hangout spot, and there's no references to alcohol. They're like elixirs. And sometimes it can be as simple as just how you word things, but
they're drinking juice at the
and it's all like, well, and that's another. I was like, it's like, you can look at the Sprite and be like, that's a pina colada, but it's called something totally different. So that kind of can fly it under the sensors. So in that regard, you kind of want to deal with that before you even get to that process.
Well, that kind of brings up this next question Jordan wrote, which is, at what point in development are you talking to developers about age ratings? I know that most developers are probably thinking about it, but is there a point at which you get, brought in, or do you ever have to reach out to them about that part of it?
Yeah, well, so it depends on the release plan, right? If you're looking for a Steam only release, then we don't ever talk. Like it was like, cool, good luck, man. But yeah, I say, okay, you're looking at what, Switch and PC, or PlayStation and Switch or whatever. Okay, well, this is something we're going to need to do. And then if they're going for a specific rating, which usually we don't really see with developers, the only time it kind of changes is if it's something that's like on the edge, where it's like, hey, this is really a T game, but you got these couple of things here that'll push it to M. Let's kind of, maybe talk about it, like see if we can push that down. So that can happen, pretty far on in development, because, you got to figure it all out. But in terms of the actual submission and getting the age ratings, it does have to be, and I think their exact wording is like, a accurate representation of the retail product. So it doesn't necessarily need to be finished, but it has to basically look and operate like what it would be to like a consumer off the shelf. So, yeah.
That's interesting, because like I know that occasionally one of these boards will leak an unannounced game. Mm-hmm. And in the sort of community that we're in here of like, talking about these sort of things, people will always be like, well, that means it's done. But you're saying that might not be the case, right? That means it's whatever percent done that they feel they can certify that it's close to whatever the language you just used is.
Yeah. So it could be almost done, or it could be just like, hey, we're only like 40% of the way through, but this gameplay loop and this content is the exact same throughout, and we've got everything else written out. You can see to the end. So like, it could be at that point that they get it. And that just is sort of up to like the publisher, or if you're self-publishing, the dev, like at what point you want to do that.
What would be the benefit of doing it so early if it really only takes a few weeks usually?
Then you already have it, and it's not something you have to think about. You can focus more, if you're smaller, you focus more on making the game. And then when you're going into cert, for example, you can worry about, why are we hitting all of these technical issues that it's not performing on, rather than, oh, now I got to chase all of these and find these emails and figure out something like that.
Gotcha.
That's what I would say. From personal experience, I would always wait. It's just easier.
Gotcha.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess that kind of leads to the next one. Like, is there anything in particular that can really make or break an age rating? Say something that'll like automatically make it a T, automatically make it an M, automatically make it an AO, which I think we can all imagine what that is.
Well, yes, like absolutely. There are definitely, so for all of like the big categories that exist in most all of them are violence, sexual content, drugs, language, and then and like fear, like scary horror images, which you don't really see much on the ESRB, but all of the other ones have it. And then there's an other category for things like racism or like Nazi imagery and like stuff like that. And yeah, there are certain things, and it is kind of a funny culture thing. What will automatically trigger a higher rating? But yeah, those absolutely exist.
Okay,
And yeah,
so
there's a lot of them. Yeah,
yeah. Now I gotta. Once you said Nazi imagery, I'm like, and you were already talking about the German board.
Mhm.
What does a Nazi symbol, or like what level
Yeah, like Wolfenstein
are we
or
talking about?
something.
Yeah, like what level are we talking about where it's like automatically jumps up the rating?
It used to be completely illegal in Germany.
Yeah.
Like full stop. I want to say in like 2018 or 2019 they overturned that, and now you can have Nazi imagery, but it has to be it has to be like historical, and I like treated like more respectfully, and the Nazis have to be the bad guys, obviously. And so we have a strategy game coming out that's a World War II game. So I had to get USK rating, and it was the first time I've ever checked that box of unconstitutional symbols, is what they say, which is just funny. But yeah, so that entailed like along with the normal age rating stuff, like a document of here is every swastika in the game, every like what like Nazi uniform, like I think like Hitler's in a couple cutscenes, like stuff like that, just everywhere. And then that they look at with more of a finer tooth comb, and immediately you're getting an 18, like the highest rating in USK, like you are getting it. What you're hoping for is that you get that and you don't get a refusal of classification, which would effectively ban it for sale in that territory.
Are there other like hot button things in different regions that you have to be concerned about? Like that makes me really curious if, I don't know, one of the other ratings boards has an issue like that isn't such a big deal, maybe in other ones.
Yeah. I mean, Australia is a lot more stern with violence than we are. We have tons of violent video games, but Australia will ban games straight up for being too violent. Hotline Miami 2 is banned in Australia because they deemed it too violent, along with tons of other games. PEGI has a huge thing with gambling and like wanting to keep like younger players safe from gambling. So any sort of fake gambling or things that can resemble gambling will almost always get you an automatic 18,
even if it's like a cartoony or like.
It depends on how it's handled.
Gotcha.
So like if it's like this is clearly just like a more of a carnival game, or it's played in that kind of sense, then yeah. But if you have a casino that you can interact with, you're going to get an 18 regardless of the content. And that like gambling is, that can push up ratings in other territories, but I know that they a few years ago really started to take a crack at that. So yeah, that's a big one for them.
How does that affect like games with like loot boxes and things like that? Does that affect the age rating?
That is why they started cracking down on that. Actually, that's why they started making that, because they were trying to combat loot boxes and saying like, hey, this is a form of gambling. So that would make your game with loot boxes an 18, which effectively would mean that children could not purchase it, which was kind of their way of trying to, get down on that issue.
Makes sense. I mean,
I'm
Epic got in trouble for that. So they got in big trouble for that one. Of what was it like? They had psychologists basically study how to make games more addicting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that makes perfect sense why the EU would be like, you can't do that.
They're like, this is pretty bad, man.
Yeah, this is bad. Anyway,
you kind of mentioned earlier AO, and we didn't really like explain what that is, because I feel like your average gamer might not even know what AO is. Like we never see that rating, and we're kind of talking about things that push it over the line or for areas. AO is the highest rating that the ESRB does, right? That's adults only. What? And Jordan kind of asked this, and I think we all know the answer. Like you said, it's like simulated sex. It's kind of like what you were talking about, right? Like with the hot coffee thing. No, just kind of curious about your thoughts on AO. Do you ever see AO? Does that ever get, come down as a rating, or do consoles even want AO games on them? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it just kind of a death kiss, or?
Yeah, it's extremely rare, and you don't really see it because, like consoles don't want it. You used to not be able to carry a game in a retail store if it had an AO rating. So prior to Steam and stuff like that, that was the only way people could buy your game. So nowadays, if a game were to get an AO, so like just a straight up porn game, right? Which I think there's a few of those on Steam. I'm not an expert. They just, they don't bother getting rated because it's just like, why would you do that? Funny though, so like that's the most common one, but you could get an AO for a couple of other reasons. So talking about gambling, whereas the PEGI was like simulated gambling, any sort of actual gambling game where you gamble real money is an AO, which I think makes sense because it's effectively a virtual casino. And then you could get it for other things, but it is extremely rare. The only case I can remember in recent memory was that game Hatred, that like super edgy, like isometric shooter where you just like, it was like a ripoff of the first Postal, but that got an AO for violence, which a lot of people were sort of shocked at because, I mean, the game has like, pretty hardcore subject matter, but it's not any more violent than like Mortal Kombat per se. But I don't know if you know the ins and outs. It was like, that obviously there's like two things that game did that I so like, that'll take an AO pretty naturally. So like violence, for example, violence, blood, gore, dismemberment, all of that kind of stuff you talk about, right, when you're filling out your violence section. Some things that the ESRB wants to know are, can defenseless characters be harmed, right? And if so, what happens? So GTA can get away with it because if you hurt defenseless people, you get a wanted system. The cops come after you. You are technically punished. So it's like, you can do it, but it's, you're not supposed to. The game is telling you not to do that. And then the other thing is like, are there any rewards for violence? Which most of the time is yes, because you get XP, new weapons,
the
stuff.
Game.
Stuff like that. Like that's usually always that. Hatred had a system where you could like execute like just random strangers, like non-hostile NPCs, and that would be how you got your health back. Oh. So it was like you could harm non-hostile NPCs, and not only were you not punished for it, you were actively rewarded for it. And it was like those two things together are what got it its AO rating.
Gotcha. I'm interested to talk about Steam and ratings, like, or the lack thereof, or, I mean, you can put your rating on Steam. And if you have a rating, I know that, because your game's on other systems, you can put it on Steam. And Steam does require developers to fill out sort of some information for the public to view. But I think I'm kind of curious about how Steam does. How do they get away with this? Do games in, say, do Steam gamers in certain regions? I don't know. I'm just really like, how does it work that if Germany's real strict about it, if you're playing a Steam game in Germany, but it's unrated, you know what I mean? Or if we've like had this self-regulation in the United States, how is the government not being, but like the biggest purveyor of games doesn't adhere to it? Like, isn't that a weird situation that we have, or is it not? And I'm just missing something key here.
Well, I will say, so if a game does get banned for sale in a territory like Germany or Australia or whatever, that does include places like Steam.
Gotcha.
So even though it's not rated, it doesn't matter because the rating, so you would say you apply for an Australian rating and they refuse classification. That means that title is banned for sale in that territory. Does not matter. You can't just say like, okay, well, I'm not going to rate it then. They're like, no, that's not how that works. Yeah.
Is it because that they're more tied to the government system?
Exactly. Yeah. So the World War II game that I just mentioned that we had to get a USK rating for was specifically for Steam, which is funny because we never get age rating games for Steam, but just due to the Nazi content in the game, it kind of automatically flagged Steam system and it was banned for sale in Germany and then a few other European countries. It was said hey, you need to get this manually reviewed before we will unblock it here. I don't know all of the specifics of how different things like that work, but there is some kind of regulation like that.
Interesting. So there, Steam flags some things, I'm guessing then, and forces a rating on them, at least in certain regions.
My follow-up question was, so say there is a sex game on Steam that is unrated. is there I mean, there's no point in rating it in the US because you can still sell it, but is that game still accessible in other regions, or is it just accessible in the US because you can get away with no rating because the rating system is not technically a regulatory body of the government?
That's kind of a complicated question. So it depends on how moral you are, because you technically don't have to apply for ratings for a lot of games if you're only selling on Steam. So if you make like a porn game, for example, yeah, that would probably get banned for sale in a few territories. But if you never bother to apply, and then you can't get refused classification, and then you have it on Steam and just kind of translate some of the text, it usually flies under the radar enough that nobody really cares, because there's just so many of them. It's kind of more like if you want bigger exposure for the game or potentially on consoles, then that's when you run the risk of hitting something like that. Like Unity asset flip porn games, I don't really think care too much about
Ethics or morals
with the government.
I just think it's kind of fascinating that Valve has kind of gotten away with their global positioning too. And also that makes me think about China. You mentioned Taiwan having its own little board, and we talked about all the different boards. Does China have any regulatory system that you know of? I mean, I know it's a whole different thing.
Yeah. So we have a whole like separate China division because gaming in China is just so different in general. As far as I understand it, I don't think they have a ratings board, but every game does have to be approved by the government, which I think also just any piece of media has to be approved by the government to be sold in China, which
it's its own beast, right?
Don't even know any of that stuff. Yeah. I know you can't have skeletons for one in any game in Chinese.
Really?
And that's like a religious thing, I think, like skeletons and ghosts and stuff. Like they're very sacred of the dead and the afterlife. So that will just not fly at all.
Well, that's going to get rid of a lot of otherwise harmless games, I feel like. Fascinating. Yeah, I just curious. I also relatedly, again, you mentioned that there are several sort of small region ones. What are they? You mentioned Taiwan. Are there other small regional ones?
There's Taiwan. There's Saudi Arabia has its own one that is fairly new. Started maybe 6 years ago. GCM. Or GCAM, I think it's called. Brazil has its own ratings board. New Zealand has one that is separate from Australia, but they a lot of times kind of work close together. But that's one that sometimes I deal with. Oh man, I know that there's others, but off the top of my head, those are the ones I remember.
Interesting. And are there specific games that you target some of those for, or is it?
Not necessarily. As long as the game is not super crazy mature or anything like that, we usually just do them all just to get it out of the way. Some of those territories will allow, so IARC, we were saying, for example, they're we're not ever going to do a physical release of this in Saudi Arabia. So we're going to do the IARC rating for that. And they will allow that. Sony, for example, will allow that. But if it's no harm, no foul, then sometimes we apply for it just because it helps down the line with different, manufacturers and regulations and stuff like that.
Well, I think we should probably wrap this up, but I do have one question. If you can answer this, how much does it cost? I assume there's a fee.
Yeah, it varies from board to board, but usually the way it goes is there's a base submission fee, and that is relative to your budget. So, most games pay the standard amount, but if you're an indie, which I think the cutoff is $1 million. So I think it's anything under $1 million. They do give you a bit of a break. And then ESRB specifically has what they call digital to physical. So if it's a game that's been for sale for, I think it's a year. So if it's been on digital stores for a year and you're doing a physical version of it, then you can get an even lower break in price, which is nice, But anyway, so there's that. And then for each platform, which I guess that's not something I mentioned. So if you want your game to come out on Xbox, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, and Nintendo Switch, that is 4 certificates you need. You need one for each each specific platform, and that's an additional fee for each one.
Gotcha. And I assume every board has a fee.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I think the Saudi Arabia one is free, but like,
right.
Yeah.
What is that really? But yeah. And then of course there's like different tiers of like, well, do you want the standard? Do you want like an expedite? Like, do you want this in, do you want this in 5 days? Then it's up. But yeah, it varies, but it's a few $1,000s at the minimum.
Well, yeah, as we bring this to a close, Jared, how are you after working in this? In preparing for this episode, I was reading about ratings and thinking about them. And as a parent, I actually find them pretty useful. Like my son comes to me with some game I'm not familiar with that he saw somebody on YouTube playing, and he's like, I would want to buy this on Steam. And I'll be like, well, what's the rating? You know what I mean? But I also just Googling about ratings found like, you know, in like clickbaity YouTube videos, but like ratings are meaningless and this stuff. Like, where do you land? Like, after having worked on it, do you like have any personal feelings about ratings, or has it made you feel more shades of gray, or can you even share your personal feelings about ratings?
No, yeah, for sure. I think it's like at its core, it's a good thing because, like you say, for parents, but ultimately that's what it is it's for parents. And unfortunately, you know, you can go through all the process and say, hey, this game has this and this and this and this. It's an M rating. And you make that very clear. And someone will just be like, it's a video game. It's for kids, whatever. And they'll buy it for their kid. And then it's this whole up in arms thing. So, I mean, they have their place. That's the thing is it is for, you know, more for parents, or just for people who like, maybe they see like, yeah, I'll play an M-rated game, but hey, this has like sexual content. Like, yeah, maybe that's not for me, you know? So it has its place. But yeah, when it comes to like the parenting thing, I find, at least personally, a lot of parents don't really give a shit what their kids play, but you should.
Yeah, you probably should. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it reminds me, I mean, I worked at the Alamo Draft House for quite a while, and I worked there whenever Sausage Party came out. And that's a 3D animated movie, but it's insanely raunchy. And I remember people would take their children to it, you know, between the ages of like 7 and 11. And, you know, we can't tell them not to do that. But the person selling the ticket says, hey, just so you know, this movie is rated R. It is pretty raunchy. Just want you to be aware before you go in. And I want to tell you, dude, like 9 times out of 10, they walk out of the theater and they ask for a refund. And it's like, we told you what this movie was going to be like. The other one that I remember off the top of my head was Wolf of Wall Street, bringing like a 8 or 9-year-old to Wolf of Wall Street. And I'm like, first of all, that movie's 3 hours long. No kid's going to want to sit there for 3 hours. Second of all, when you first get into that movie in the first 10 minutes, there's just drugs and sex all throughout the film, but it's in the first 10 minutes. But so overall, I feel like, yeah, it's like helpful to have as a tool. Yeah, as an adult, who cares? Whatever. And then also it just kind of gives parents like agency and to just make those decisions without having to play the game themselves. And I kind of support that kind of stuff. Just you know, it's my mom, kind of by the time I was about 15 or 16 was like, okay, I don't really give a shit. Like, I know you're not going to be a crazy person because you played Resident Evil 4. I remember when I was buying Resident Evil 4, I think I was like 16 or 17 at the time. And the clerk was like, hey, just so you know, this game's like a little violent. She's like, I don't care about that. Is there any sex in it? And then they're like, no, but there's a little bit of like cursing, but it's in Spanish. And she's like, great, maybe he'll learn a little bit of Spanish. You know? So like, I don't know. I kind of am in support of that. And I kind of agree. Like in the US, it's interesting because it is like separate from the government. Technically, it's like a self-regulatory body, which I find interesting in the sense of like, you know, American politics, but that's a whole nother conversation. American politics is very, you know, free market, quote unquote, free market. We don't want any regulation. So it's interesting to see how it played out in American politics, but overall, I'm like pretty in support of it just as a tool for parents in this ever more confusing world that we live in, you know? Yeah,
for sure. Thanks, Jared, for enlightening us. That was really interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, stick around because we're going to do one more break. And when we come back after this short break, we're going to be talking about the games that we've been playing recently. I'll be honest that like this past week, I honestly haven't gamed that much, which is kind of wild to think about. But the one game that I for sure have been playing is Smash Ultimate. Like for some reason, I have just gotten back into Smash and playing as Mega Man, which I talked about last week, but I have continued to, and it's just been like when I have a few minutes, I'll just pick it up, and I am still bad as Mega Man. But that's part of what's kind of fun about it is that like he plays so differently, and it's been a challenge to learn. And I play online, and I'm down at the like 2 million whatever GSP, whatever they call it. It's a terrible rating system they have in Smash, and it's really confusing. But if you play, I guess you know how bad that is. But I feel like even just today, I feel like I got like a little something clicked a little bit, you know what I mean? And and around 2 million, I actually win every once in a while. So it took me a while to get down there, and that was painful. I'm back on playing Smash a lot. I need to find a new game to play. And I have a ton of games in my backlog. I just got to find the right one for right now. But
you could always just play Splatoon 3.
I'm trying not to, Jordan. That was what I talked about for like 3 years or however long it's been. I'm trying to take a break.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since I've been on. So I did end up finishing my playthrough of Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door. Just wanted to quickly follow up. I finished it. Thought it was fantastic. I do have my minor gripes with the game, mostly because I tried to 100% it and do everything. So like I did all the side quests, which really doesn't have any sort of payoff. So my minor gripes are not with the game itself. The game itself is fantastic, but really enjoyed it. I'm just going to move on because that was a while ago. And then after that, since I had been playing that game for so long, I was looking for some more shorter experiences. So 2 games I played. One, I played Pony Island, which I had played Inscription, a Devolver Digital published game, which I loved. And I had never played that Daniel Mullins. Yeah, I had never played any of his other games. So I just decided to give Pony Island a try, and I beat it in one night, which is beautiful. I love a game you can beat in 2 to 3 hours. And it was awesome. It was just as like weird and world bending as Inscription, but just in a much shorter package. I know he's currently working on Pony Island 2, which I'm now excited for. But the premise of the game is kind of like you're trapped in a computer program and you're forced to play this game about a pony. It's a very simple, like mobile-esque style game where you're just jumping over stuff. And it just kind of devolves from there. Anyway, really enjoyed that game. That was fantastic. If you're looking for a game to beat in an afternoon, perfect fit. The other game I played, which I had Super Mario 3D Land. I got it whenever it came out, but I had never played that game. So I beat that game all the way through, except for I think the last 2 levels I gave up. But I never played Bowser's Fury. So I said, I know this is supposed to be like a pretty short experience. And incredible. So much fun.
Yes.
I beat it 100%. I got every cat shine. I really enjoyed that version of like an open world Mario.
Did you have to look up the baby cats?
I did for the 5th one. Like,
yes,
or
the only
third
one. That's the only one. It's a perfect game other than that.
Yeah, that was like by far the worst cat shine to like, and it's weird because a lot of the cat shines, it's like, a little thing that takes maybe like 2 to 3 minutes. Some of them are like 30 seconds to a minute. And it's like, I like that variety, like different reward systems, but those were all like 10 minutes at least. And I'm like, this is really bizarre that they decided to include this type of mission. I also didn't even know what I was supposed to do at first. I just found a cat that is crying and it says 0 out of 1 cat. And I'm like, what does 0 out of 1 cat emoji mean? I don't know what this means. And then I was like, oh yeah, you do see all these like cats just hanging out. Maybe it's supposed to look like her. It just took me a while to figure it out, even on the first one. So, but
I'm sorry to bring the negativity in because I love Bowser's Fury. Yeah, talk more about it.
Yeah, other than that, that was it. I thought I loved just like the way the progress went and like how it slowly opened up the world and you're like uncovering the goop and The inclusion of Bowser Jr. was like really fun. I put it on helps a little just because I felt like part of the experience the first time you play through, you got to have Bowser Jr. by your side, see what's up with that. But anyway, incredible. Loved it. I thought it was really, really, really cool. I hope that is kind of the way forward. As much as I like Super Mario Odyssey, I think it'd be really interesting to see a larger game with just a huge, massive world like this would be really interesting. And then after that, I was like, okay, well, I want to play some platformers. I tried a couple different ones. I wasn't like really feeling any of them. So I was like, you know what? I never played Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And I hear it's supposed to be incredible. One of the best platformers ever made. And I am now in World 5. Dude, in World 1, I was kind of like, yeah, it's fine. It's just kind of like Donkey Kong Country Returns. And then by World 2, I was like, oh, I can't. The way that the levels are structured and built and they evolve as you're moving through them is awesome. It's so much fun to play. Also, that game is like very hard. It was much more difficult than I was ever expecting it to be. And yeah, I'm just really, really enjoying it. I'll probably try to beat it. I just beat my first K level last night.
Nice.
It was just me banging my head against the wall for like 45 minutes until I finally got it. And I was just like, I got to do 5 more of these.
Worth it. Jordan, you're really speaking my language with these last two. I love both of those games. Yeah.
But yeah, that's about it. That's what I've been playing. What about you, Jared? What have you been playing?
Man, you had a bunch of great picks there. Never finished Tropical Freeze because damn, that was hard.
Yeah.
Man, what have I been playing, dude? I've just been playing the Elden Ring DLC. That's all I've been playing.
Well, talking about hard, isn't that supposed to be pretty hard?
I don't know. No? I have some opinions on that. I mean, it's as hard as the base game.
How many times did you beat the base game? Let's start there.
I beat it 5 times. Okay.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, I loved it. I played through it. The final boss is just the worst thing ever. That was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in any video game ever. But now I'm on my second playthrough of the DLC, and it's just great. Yeah, that game is like crack cocaine. I try and play something else, and I just keep coming back.
Dude, that's really funny. You're already on your second playthrough of the DLC when I know some people haven't even beat the DLC at all. So are you using different characters from your original 5 playthroughs? Or
Yeah. So each time I did it, I did a different build. Because to me, that's what was the most fun about it, is that it's the most like RPG like of any Souls game. Because even though in the Souls games you can sort of build a different character, just be in this big massive world, you can go how hyper specific you want. So I beat it, and then you have an option to do New Game Plus, but I would never do New Game Plus. I would just make a new character. And it does a thing where after you beat the final boss, it'll just kind of load you to right before the final boss. So I'm able to just pick these different characters, go right into the DLC, and go from there.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm impressed because I feel like I was hearing a lot of people say it was hard or the final boss was hard, but you're like, meh.
Well, final boss was hard. I'm not trying to flex on it. I think the thing, I don't know, like what it was is like everyone's saying, this game is so hard. I was like, dude, the base game has been out 2 years, so nobody thinks it's hard anymore because you've been playing it for 2 years. You know all the boss patterns. You know where all of like the overpowered stuff is. So of course you go in for the first time, you're just going to get demolished. And yeah, I'm not going to pretend like it was easy, but it was like just as hard as the base game for me.
Right on.
But yeah, I love it.
Well, awesome. I think that's going to do it then for this episode on age ratings. Jared, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, really thank you guys.
Thanks also to milkyway.co, who does our website. Thank you to Corduroy, who does our music. Thank you to all our patrons on Patreon. If you're looking for me, Patrick, online, you can find me most places as PDYX.
You can find me on the internet at Bordan.
What about you, Jared? Are you out on the social medias?
No, you can't find me at all.
Can't find Jared, but you can find Devolver Digital online, right?
That's true. Yeah, I should probably do my job a little bit. Yeah, I mean, on Twitter, Devolver Digital. We got all of the Instagram, Devolver Digital. We have a Discord.gg/Devolver Digital. We're on TikTok, I think, if you're a Zoomer, but I don't understand any of that. And yeah, just about anywhere. Devolver Digital, also website, devolverdigital.com.
Is there a Devolver Digital podcast?
There is, that I am on sometimes. Yeah, it's Forkcast, like forecast with a fork. So that's Forkcast at devolverdigital.com. I think that's also on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I don't know. I don't do any of that part. I just talk about video games. Yeah. But we like interview like people in the industry. So if you're interested in, like how people got jobs in video games from like either devs to like something like I do, for example, or just all this kind of weird stuff. We usually just kind of interview people, talk about their journey and what it's like to work in video games. So if that interests you, check it out.
Yeah, well, definitely check out Devolver Digital's many great offerings and their podcasts and check out Jared's episodes on there. And yeah, thanks for listening. I'm going to do my best to give our David outro here. I'm terrible at this, but if you're looking
You got this, man.
If you're looking for our podcast online, we are Super Switch Headz on Instagram and Facebook, and we are Switch Headz on Twitter. And also, we have a Discord. You should definitely come check out the Switch Headz Discord. It's a great community. And that's it, right?
Yeah, you can email us on Gmail, Facebook, all the things
Worst
that David says.
Outro ever, but one thing I will say is thank you so much for listening. This has been a really great episode here with Jared. We're gonna have another great episode next week. Until then, stay safe, be kind to yourself and one another, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.